It's a public hearing and information on a 1/4% sales tax for transportation, Proposition 1. And we'll begin by hearing from Mayor Hart, then from Mayor Pike, and then from Cameron Cutler, and then we will hear from Larry Myers.
Larry, do you have anyone else with you tonight? Are you going to be?
And then we'll take public comment.
Is there anyone here that's going to be assisting you?
Not assisting me, but maybe there's some that are
Yeah.
here for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't bring
Well-
anybody.
Okay, Mayor Hart will.
Thank you, Commissioner Gardner. Serving as the chairman of the Dixie Transportation Executive Council, I have a chance to see firsthand what the transportation needs and problems are as we meet together every month with representatives from UDOT and from the cities and county. In 1997, when the legislature adjusted the fuel tax with the intent of it carrying the lion's share of the road maintenance needs across the state, little did they know that technology was going to increase the fuel efficiency of the cars that we drive as dramatically as it has over those 20 years. The net effect is that between that and alternative fuel vehicles, we have been spending progressively less per road mile that we travel. It's terrific. It's sort of like a tax reduction, not governmentally imposed, but practically speaking, that's what it's translated into. The problem with that is that over that same 20-year period of time, the cost of maintaining our roads has increased. Not only that, but we've, as other types of transportation, cycling, walking, etc., have become more and more popular, trail systems have become in high demand, and so our city and all of the cities across the county are trying to put in place a network of trails that will link the county so that those who choose to cycle or travel otherwise can do so. Also, Suntran appeared on the scene several years ago and has become an extremely popular and needed source of transportation. Ivan City is the beneficiary of that. So we find ourselves today now with the legislature a couple of years ago having put together a way to try and improve this lessening revenue source so that the cities and counties weren't so burdened by the cost of road maintenance. And so the adjustment in the fuel tax was put in place. Now last year in Ivan City, which I know the best, we spent approximately $725,000 on road maintenance, about 12.5% of our total budget. Of that, around $325,000 of that was covered by B&C road funds that came from the fuel tax. That left us with over $400,000 that had to be spent out of our general fund. Now, that's well and good, except that the general fund is intended to cover a lot of other services in our city and in others. And so it's becoming an increasingly heavy burden to try and keep our roads in good shape using property tax, and in Ivan City's case, very little sales tax to accomplish that. So the adjustment in the fuel tax is going to make a difference of an estimated $50,000 a year, and if Proposition 1 passes, that's going to impact Ivan City to the tune of about $75,000 a year in road maintenance and another $35,000 in transit since we participate with Suntran. That's still going to leave Ivan City with nearly a $300,000 burden coming from property tax out of our general fund. So as we look at the possible solutions to this problem, we can see that the direction that things are going now is completely unsustainable. At some point in time, we simply won't be able to maintain our roads effectively and our trails effectively. And so where does government go? I mean, if there's not enough money, we really only have one source. So I personally look at this, at Proposition 1, as more of a correction than an increase. Technically, it's a tax increase, and I, like all of you, don't believe that all my tax dollars are well spent. But these tax dollars, we have the benefit of those who come to visit the county participating in that sales tax and paying part of the maintenance on the roads, which is certainly appropriate since they will be using them as well. We believe that that without this additional funding, we're going to face an increasing crisis, if you will, of road maintenance. So I thank the county for putting this the Proposition 1 on the ballot. We will certainly abide by whatever our constituents decide, but it's a problem that isn't going to go away, and so thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Hart. Mayor Pike.
Is it possible to dim the lights just a little
Yep.
bit? I think it might help. Perfect.
Is that too much, or you want?
I think it's okay. Yeah. Okay, just from the perspective, let's see. There we go. Let's see. I'm going to have to skip through these. There we go, and then we'll go back up when the camera gets up. Just a little bit further introduction. And this is a little bit, this applies to St. George, so I'm speaking to St. George right now. Appreciate Mayor Hart in his dual role tonight with the planning organization, Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the Mayor of Ivins. But what we're talking about here is 0.25% sales tax, an increased sales tax that is authorized by the state legislature. As you know, we can't, as local counties or cities, we can't authorize, directly. We can't just decide we're going to impose a sales tax. The only thing we really have any control over is a property tax, unless the legislature says you can have a local option sales tax under what parameters. So they gave us 2 sessions ago the opportunity, county by county, to put this before the voters. And I wish to publicly thank the county commission for allowing that to happen. Because to me, in my mind, that's the best way, really the best alternative. If we're looking to have a tax increase, wouldn't it be nice to at least let the voters be informed and then make the decision? And then the county commission would decide to impose that if it passes sufficiently. So we're talking about 0.25% sales tax increase for every $4 spent on non-food items, namely non-grocery store food items. 1 cent is allocated to transportation, and of that, the way it's made up, 0.10% would go to transportation, which includes road projects and trail projects, and then 0.10% would go to transit if the municipality has transit, and then 0.05% would go to the county. And so in our situation, just the way the formulas work, it's roughly about 1.5 million would go to transportation, and roughly 1.5 million would go to transit in St. George. Okay, and Ivins at this time would also get a 0.10% that would go towards transit because they link into the SunTrans system. In those areas that wanted to add transit, it would be possible for them to also get that 0.10 that would go towards transit. And then otherwise, the county would get that 0.10 in addition to the 0.05% for all cities that don't have a transit system. So this is a huge deal, and just to also talk about the value that I think this has over some other solutions. The bottom point there, it's estimated that tourists, visitors, will contribute 30 to 40% of the new revenue. That's a big deal, since, as Mayor Hart already described, some of these vehicles and it's great that they're getting better mileage, or that they're, not just hybrids, but some of them, fully electric cars. They're currently not contributing in any way towards the road maintenance, other than maybe tire tax. And so with this, it gives those who are tourists and visitors a chance to help us contribute towards the roads they're driving on. And the gas tax isn't sufficient. The state legislature knew it wouldn't be sufficient, but they felt this was another way to help some of those things happen, and to have everyone participate in the cost of maintaining and expanding our roads as needed. So that's just sort of a brief maybe introduction to what it is, and I'd like to turn the time to our City Public Works Director, Cameron Cutler, who will take the rest of our time from the city to just kind of talk about our area, some of the geographical challenges, and then a really nice description of why it's important that we either need to pay now or we'll end up paying more later. Cameron?
Glad to be here, Commissioners. Thanks for allowing me here. Just a little bit of an overview of our area. We live in a great place. We live in a wonderful place with a lot of red rock, a lot of black rock, and this is just kind of an area. I could have included the whole county, but obviously I'm just looking at data for most of City of St. George, but I think it applies to other municipalities. City of St. George, some of the geographical features that we have, I've added a shading relief map to the background of the image to be able to show you the hills, more or less the obstacles. When you think of transportation, it's not really easy to put a tunnel through a large mountain, and that's part of the reason why we have some of the traffic congestion. With the hills and the nice vistas that we have, we also have the rivers and the washes. With the Virgin River, the Fort Pierce Wash, and also the Santa Clara having the confluence right just in the south part of downtown St. George, it makes it kind of hard to get around. We have the environmental reserves. I put the HCP, or the Desert Tortoise Reserve, on the map. There's also other reserves to the south that when you start to add all this up, there's choke points. There's locations within the City of St. George and within other areas, Washington and Santa Clara and Ivins, where you get some extra traffic congestion because of those choke points. Here are some of the arterials and corridors with the roadways, and you can see I-15, the state routes in blue. You can also see some of the major corridors, Dixie Drive on the west side, River Road, kind of on the easterly north-south main corridor that crosses the river, goes along the bluff. You also have the crossings under I-15. You have Riverside Drive. Some of these corridors at times get congested during the day, especially where you get the bottleneck locations. Here's some of the major bridges that we have over the rivers. There's also culverts on here that I did not identify on this map, but if you know the area and just where the blue meets the black, you have culverts, at least some sort of a crossing. Where you have some of these choke points, and I didn't put all of them on a map, but I put some of them where we do get a lot of congestion. That said, it's a great area to live. We have a lot of, again, vistas. We have a lot of geographical things that we really love. And we can put the trails down next to the rivers and washes, and we can really enjoy the area. It just kind of makes it difficult for traffic and creates that congestion a lot. Mayor already went through the local option sales tax and defined it. Along with this map and the congestion areas, we've kind of identified some of the locations along some of these corridors and other improvements where monies could be spent. River Road, the top one, I'll just take the time on that, just so I don't, to be brief. River Road, for example, in that, I didn't number them, it's one of the areas up there by Dixie Drive, or the DDI, I want to say milepost 8 at St. George Boulevard, River Road. 100 South is what goes underneath I-15 with one of the few culverts or the structures that we have under I-15. When it meets up with River Road, we get a lot of congestion right at that intersection. One of the travel movements that we have at the intersection today that needs some improvements is northbound left turn. One of the possible locations where you could spend some additional monies today would be a dual left turn. dual northbound left turn to be able to accommodate the additional traffic. When you think about a dual left turn, it not only helps that one movement of traffic, but it helps the whole intersection. Because as you put a dual left turn in there, you can get twice the amount of traffic through there on the same amount of green time. Or you can reduce the amount of green time and not take the green time away from the other movements, the through movements on River Road, for example, and it helps run the intersection overall because you can add that green time back into the other legs of the intersection. I don't want to, sorry, I'm probably getting too technical, but adding dual lefts where it's needed helps the intersection overall. Riverside Drive, the other red dot down there with the Virgin River Bridge, you have Riverside Drive on the north side and 1450 South on the south side. Also two candidates for possible dual left turns. It's just another area where possible monies could be spent, some improvements could be made to be able to help that congested area. Pavement preservation is another area that I've talked about where our transportation monies are spent. This is just a graph showing how pavement preservation, what happens to a roadway over time. The condition of a roadway, once it's newly paved in pristine, perfect condition theoretically, over time it starts to deteriorate. It depends on the amount of traffic that you have. It depends on the roadway itself and what the subgrade conditions are, but over time every single road deteriorates. The red curve in this graphic shows the pavement condition as it deteriorates over time. Typically roadways might last 20 years, they might last longer depending on how much traffic goes on there. Pavement preservation program is, the theory behind it is, and it's an industry standard more or less, that as you seal a road, crack seal it, as you surface it, as you put sealants on it, you preserve the initial pavement structure underneath that sealant. And that helps that roadway last a lot longer. The blue graph, the blue finger, I guess, on the very top, that represents preventative maintenance. That's seal coats and crack seals and chip seals and slurry seals. The less cost or the least cost improvements that you can put on a roadway to be able to lengthen the life of that road. As you fall down on that curve, and as time goes on and you do not preserve that pavement, if you don't have the money, if you don't have the workers or whatever else, the know-how to do it, or whatever it might be, and that roadway gets out there toward a lower pavement condition, then you have to do things like cold in-place recycling. You have to mill up the pavement, you have to redo the pavement, and that costs a lot more money to do. This graphic on the next graphic kind of represents that same, where you have an excellent pavement condition up on the top, and then over time it shows a 20-year life of that roadway. If you don't take care of your road, it costs a lot more down the road to be able to maintain that road, the structural integrity of that roadway. This is a graph indicating some of those treatments that you can use on a roadway. The top ones are much less money. The bottom ones cost a lot more money. The top ones, when you think of a fog seal, a crack seal, you might talk anywhere from 3 cents to 20 cents a square foot. A micro surfacing might be upwards of 30 cents or 33 cents a square foot. When you get down to the lower full depth reclamation and the hot in-place recycling, cold place in-place recycling, you might be $6, you might be $10 a square foot, depending on what you're doing and what you have to do if you have bad subgrade. Typically a new pavement section, you just mill up the pavement and then repave it. It might be $4, $5 a square foot if that's all you're doing to it. But so you try in the pavement preservation world, you try and save that roadway for a longer period of time so you don't have to come back and spend more monies. This is just a little bit of in the city of St. George and how road miles have increased. Our pavement management budget, you see our current miles of paved roadways within the city of St. George and also square footage of pavement. And our current budget that we typically have budgeted for the last few years, the key to this depends on how much square footage you have within your cities and how much money you're budgeting. But if you take the cheaper treatment surfaces like crack sealing, slurry sealing, chip sealing, today the calculation is 13.4 years per treatment per road that we can do something on that road and then come back later on after 13 years and try and resurface it again, retreat it. The problem with that is most treatments that you put on a roadway don't last that long. They last anywhere from 5 to 10 years. The industry standard for chip seal is about 7 years. and we try and lengthen that out. And so the amount of money that you budget is key in the early years of a roadway. It's better to try and spend some more money to be able to treat that roadway, even the cheaper preservation treatments, so that you don't have to come back on that road later on and spend a lot more money. Your road miles increase per year, that's within the city of St. George. It just kind of shows some of the numbers where we're adding about 1.7 million square feet per year, and we're already a little bit behind the curve. And so just one of the options where additional monies could be spent. Transit service also shows our current budget, approximately $1.7 million. There's our revenue resources, the Transportation Improvement Fund, advertising agreements, fares, federal grants. The big thing with federal grants, agreements, advertising, and TIF, or the Transportation Improvement Fund, is we can match that with a federal grant to that percentage that they will allow us to. Fare box monies you cannot match. That's a guideline and a policy and a requirement for federal grants. It shows some of the ridership where we've increased over the years, starting in 2003, about 66,000 ridership in the year 2003, and we're up to about 450,000 in 2015. Some of the possible areas where you could expand or spend some additional monies for transit service, bus service times, later on during the evening, Sunday service, additional routes, whether they're inside the city of St. George or outside that area, you can expand further. Anyway, hopefully I didn't look at the time. But
No, I think it was perfect. Maybe just to capstone, just, this is the tool that is available to us now. Local governments don't have the option to impose a tax other than through, truth in taxation, property tax. So we feel like this is a good way to do that, to allow other people to participate in helping to lengthen the life of the roads, to expand transit that they're using when they're here, as well as those that live here. It is the tool we have, and it is a real issue for us. There are some of these things that Cameron has described within the city of St. George that just flat out can't happen without a stronger and greater revenue source than what we have. And some might say, well, reduce what you spend elsewhere. Well, we've done that. And that's why we're already, as Mayor Hart mentioned, and I think other mayors would say, we're already augmenting our budgets for transportation with general fund monies. So there's not a lot of room left to do that unless we want to start cutting down other necessary services. And there really aren't many that I could say you could do. We could stop building parks. But I think that gets into a quality of life issue that in our communities we come to expect. So there are some tough choices to be made, and whether we do it now or whether we do it later is the question. And as Cameron's just explained, it costs a lot more to do it later. I liken it unto taking care of our bodies. If you do the preventive types of services, same with our cars. If you take care of yourself, if you take care of your vehicle along the way and do the preventive things, it makes it a lot less expensive over the long term, and it certainly makes it more pleasant along the way as well. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll give the floor back to you, Commissioner Gardner. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Okay, Larry, we turn the time over to you to give another viewpoint on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Gardner, and commissioners and mayors too. We appreciate the service that you guys give. I know that in local government there's a lot of work and not a lot of pay and not a lot of thanks sometimes. So appreciate the presentations that have been made here. I'm speaking on behalf of many of us who, whenever we hear the term tax increase, we just have a gut reaction and we don't feel good about that particular term. And so I think there's a lot of citizens that are in that category at this point. We feel like at every level we're taxed too much already. We've heard already mentions about fuel tax, we've heard about property tax, we've heard about sales tax, and the list goes on and on. We could probably make a list of 100 different taxes that the average citizen gets hit with in the course of lifetime. And so we reach a point where, when is it too much? And many people feel like whenever there's a tax increase, we should just impose it on the principle of let's make do with what we have, rather than asking for more money from the people who are doing their best to get by in their families and their homes and with their own jobs, rather than turning more and more of their money over to the government. And so that's, I think, the voice of the people that I represent today is people who are concerned about taxation in general, and in specific, a tax increase here in our local community. I do want to say that I don't think any of us that would oppose this tax increase are against roads or against transportation. I personally think that it's one of the most important roles that our local government fulfills. And so it does need to be a top priority. And so nothing in my remarks should be construed to be opposed to having good roads, maintaining our roads, and having that type of quality of life that we have come to expect. On the other hand, I think my comments would be directed about how is the best way to go about that, and have we made it a priority to do that, and do we maybe need to make it more of a priority versus other things? One of the things that has been expressed to me by people I've talked to about this is it appears that some of the pressure that's on our roads is created by ongoing growth. We're a popular, beautiful place. Many people want to come here, want to move here, and we continue to grow. I'm sure we're one of the fastest growing counties in the country. And so my question is there some way that we could have that new growth pay a greater share of the burden that it's bringing in? If it was just the local residents that were using the roads, the ones that are here, certainly there'd still be expenses, but as we get more and more people, more and more cars on the road, that puts pressure to build new roads, to maintain, to do more maintenance. I think the chart that was up there didn't just have time, it also had miles. The more the roads are driven on, the more they're going to get wear and tear. And so one thing I would challenge the county and the cities to look at is there's some way that we can fund these type of things out of growth and development rather than just trying to spread it on to everyone who may have already paid our share when we came here or are just using, paying our share as we go of already being here, versus those who want to come here and put the added burden onto what we've already built. So that's my first question, is there some way that we can have growth help pay for this? I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but I think that's one of the challenges that our area needs to look at. The second concern I have is each city and the county needs to look at its budget and determine what its top priorities are. And perhaps in the past, transportation hasn't gotten the funding that it needed for various reasons. If that's because we're allocating revenues to other things that are not as important as transportation and roads, then I think now is the time to take a second look at our budgets for future years and see what can we change, what can we cut, what can we privatize, what is less important than our roads and our transportations. And each city and the county might have different answers for that. You might find places that you can cut. And I'm confident that each of our cities and counties have tried to keep your budgets as lean as you can, because I know that in our community we are conservative and we do try to be fiscally responsible. On the other hand, I know that there's always pressure to spend on this program or that program or this item or this purchase And every year, the tendency is that budgets go up. And so I would challenge our cities and the county to find ways to put transportation at a higher priority and to fund it with the existing revenues that we have. One thing that was mentioned was, for example, trails. I guess trails are probably not a big chunk of the transportation budget. I'm assuming they're not. I would think that they're probably fairly small compared to the rest of the transportation related expenses in any given city or county budget. But that's the type of thing where we might say trails are a quality of life thing. We'd like to have them, but if we're funding them instead of funding roads, maybe we need to reconsider. Should we be funding roads and finding a different way to have trails in our communities? That's the type of thinking that I think we need to have before we raise taxes. And so I would encourage, before we move on to a tax increase, that we take a hard look at our budgets and make transportation a higher priority with the existing revenues we have. Thank you very much for letting me speak today.
Thank you, Larry, for coming and making your presentation. Okay, we'd now open this up for public comment and maybe
Just
take
by
just
raise
a
of hands, how
couple.
many people would like to give a public comment? So
1,
there's
2, 3,
Okay.
3 or 4, not too many. Okay. All right, you want to
From right to left.
start here and state your name for the record, please?
Lisa Rutherford, I'm an Ivans resident, and I want to say thank you for holding this meeting and letting me voice my concerns. I attended the August meeting when you decided to put it on the ballot, made some comments then. Mine are similar tonight to those, but I just feel like it's important to maybe restate them. My reasons for opposing this proposition and the local option sales tax are many, maybe too many to list here and speak about. I heartily support public transportation, so let me make that clear, but I do not approve this shotgun method to do it. And I support the concerns that Mr. Myers has expressed, and I agree with some of his assertions. Getting back to how we came to this point, in 2015, when the gasoline tax was increased from 24.5 cents, we now have added about 5 cents. In addition to that, and something that doesn't get talked about very often, is the fact that when they passed that tax, because they didn't want to be locked in again to a firm tax for an extended period of time, they made it so that can be increased and is tied to a rack price for, I think it's unleaded gasoline. It can go as high as 40 cents a gallon. And that's not something that is even being discussed when we talk about this local option tax. Then we moved money in 2016, this year, from transportation, even though we were saying we had so many transportation needs, and we still are. We allowed legislators to move that money into water projects, projects that we're not even sure at this point we need. And even though that money originally was for water, then went to transportation, and now has gone back to water, it's a convoluted process, and it's troubling. Now the voters are being asked to make up for this change. On the list of items for which the revenue may be expended, public transit is listed after roads, and associated features such as sidewalks, curb, gutter, etc., and non-motorized multimodal transportation. So public transportation was not a priority when they wrote this bill, although I realize that the money would be allocated that way, but then the bill also says that the revenue cannot be used to supplant existing revenue, but that to me sounds a little squishy too. And the question is, will this really result in better public transportation? The need requires more scrutiny also. The Regional Transportation Plan 2015 to 2040 showed an $11 million shortfall in road work in this area. But that includes $94 million for the contentious Northern Corridor and doesn't even include the additional money needed for the tie-in roads for that project were it ever to happen. What other options are there that have not been fully explored, as Mr. Meyer alluded to? This was decided at the legislature by leaders of many different counties. So we need to see if this truly meets our county's needs. And then there's the question of our tax dollars for transportation being spent wisely. Now, I'm not against people making good money, but when we have UDOT, who will get some of this money, having over 1,800 employees, 300 of which make over $100,000, 9 make over $200,000, including salaries, benefits, and bonuses, while our Washington County average per capita income is $29,000. These transportation problems aren't going to go away. We will always have them here. What we need to do is figure out how to take care of them the best way. The Intergenerational Poverty Initiative that's been done identified Washington County as being one of 5 counties most at risk for intergenerational poverty. 45% of Washington County's kids are at risk of becoming or continuing in poverty. Can our effort be better focused? If tourists are one of the targets for this tax, can the effort be better focused rather than this shotgun effort? The 2015 Regional Transportation Plan also discussed public, private, and other sources of possible funding for roads and public transportation. The Utah Taxpayers Association has rejected this tax as being a bad idea. Other counties have rejected the local option sales tax, and Washington County, I believe, should too. To me, when I look back over the history of the legislative decisions that have been made that have led to the point where we're deciding on this tax, passing this tax is rewarding bad behavior. And I thank you for listening to my concerns.
Thank you. Ken, I believe you had your hand up.
Thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to address you. I'm Ken Sizemore. I'm a Santa Clara City Councilman. I also sit on the Executive Transportation Council here in Washington County. I'm the former director of the MPO here in the area, and just wanted to address 3 items quickly. Number one is, in my community of Santa Clara, we are facing the prospect of building out in the relatively near future. We're constrained by our constraints that you saw with the hills and the land ownership patterns and the other municipalities around us, and we can see the time coming relatively quickly where we're going to build out. That's going to change the whole direction of how to fund our ongoing transportation maintenance needs, because we won't be able to rely on growth and development to finance that need. And we need to start thinking about local options that are available to us to provide that financial resource. In a recent Utah League of Cities and Towns convention, we had a presentation that brought out a very interesting fact that I hadn't thought about. But the development of the entire United States, literally in the last half of the 20th century, was built on debt. Think about when a developer comes in, they borrow money from a financial institution to finance the original installation of that infrastructure. And they turn around and sell those lots to individual buyers who are, for the most part, paying off their portion of that investment in infrastructure over 30 years of a mortgage. We're already paying for that cost over 30 years with our mortgages. And we have built our country literally on borrowed money. And we're going to eventually have to pay the piper because it's not going to be sustainable. And I think it's important to have all the tools that we can have at our disposal to be able to meet that need to continually maintain these roads, because we can't rely on that borrowed money forever. The third point is that we are, as local officials, working very diligently to work together to come up with different kinds of financing alternatives to meet these ongoing maintenance needs. And we have a unified transportation plan at the state level. It's held up across the nation as one of the best efforts of working together from the local, state, and federal level. And an outcome of that planning process was the legislation that allowed this proposition to be on the ballot. And both Washington County's long-term transportation plan and the state's long-term transportation plan anticipate this type of a financing alternative into the future to fund our needs. So I think we are, as local officials, working diligently to find the best options to finance these ongoing transportation investments, as you've seen this evening. And I think that finally that it is an opportunity for us to finance our needs locally. We hear a lot of rhetoric about not relying on the federal or the state government to finance our needs locally. Well, this is a tool that the state legislature has given us to indeed do that. We can use this funding source to work locally and improve our transportation needs. Thank you again for the opportunity to make this presentation. I'm going to have to leave now. I have an American Legion post responsibility here in a few minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Ken. Speaker Clark, you had a...
Thank you. Let me express my appreciation to the mayors and to my own city councilman. My name is David Clark. I live in Santa Clara. Let me express my thanks to you and the county commission. Public service, those of us that have had that privilege know the hours are long and you miss a lot. You don't get dance recitals over again. Things don't come around your level of public service. So I want to express my appreciation for all of those that give up all of those time and hours to make our lives better. And I want to thank you. I think that this particular methodology that we're talking about here, it's a legislative act that requires local participation. I wish a lot more of the taxes that I paid I had a chance to say yes or no on that tax. I understand our representative form of democracy, I get a chance to say yes or no, but I think this is exactly the right way to do it. And I actually, rather than calling them squishy, I think this is the right way to do this type of process. When the legislature increased the gas tax here a while ago, they, nearly all of it went into the state's pocket, not into the local B&C road fund. Instead, they gave an opportunity that says, all right, if you're really serious about needing these road funds, let's have the people in your county say, yes, we're willing to pay that portion of it. Have each county commission authorize that and have it go to a public vote. I think that is, particularly in this county, what I think is not only the right way, but I think it's built upon the shoulders of what has been a cooperative effort between all of the communities to help lift everybody's boat in this process. It doesn't matter whether it's cooperative through water, through sewer, transportation, the Metropolitan Co-op, you can name a number of organizations that are very important and elevate themselves and leverage their assets to greater good all over the county by doing so. Let me just talk about a couple of things here. I was in the legislature when they took the money away from water, the quarter of a quarter, and gave it to roads. We were staring at a number of large projects. I think all of us have driven up and down I-15, that portion in Utah County when it came to the TIF and the other items that were involved with there. There was a need to try and cover the improvements of the overpasses that were 50 and 60 years old now and needed to have some renovation. So we took that quarter of a quarter, and to make an accusation that now we are taking it from transportation, I would tell you that historically that is water money that was originally funded into water and now is being returned to water. And I don't think out of the 273 communities that are within the state of Utah that are incorporated, there's not a single one that hasn't gone to the water fund to borrow money sometime in their history, some of it 50, 60 years ago, where they improved their quality of water and the quality of life in their community by taking advantage of that. And I think that's a very good basis. Of justifying why there ought to be that portion of a quarter that goes back into water. And to say that the water is being for projects that have yet been justified, there's $30 million that the water managers of the state, $30 billion worth of water projects needed over the next 30 years in the state of Utah. Much of that is dealing with crumbling infrastructure, where 60 and 70-year-old cast iron pipes and water distribution systems in the more populated areas of the state will need to be replaced. There is a whole litany of things besides castigating certain water projects. Also, there was some questions about whether this money would go to UDOT and some of the salaries associated with this. This is what we're talking about tonight, has nothing to do with UDOT. It is entirely locally generated and locally spent, and would not have any association going back to UDOT. And I would just maybe add some question about trying to find significant ways to improve how we do our budgets and have those that are impacting, that don't live here, pay their fair share. I think this tax is the poster child of exactly how to do that. When you have 30 or as high as 40% of the revenue coming from people whose zip code is not in Washington County, of the millions of people that come and visit here, this is exactly the way to capture and to have them pay for 40% of all of the improvements. And I'm going to drive on nearly 100% of the time. I think that is good measure and good time. And most of all, I think those of us that have had a chance to serve in public service, I really did this for one reason when I was involved, and I found the hearts of the men and women who have served generally try and find a way to leave it better than they found it. I think that's the principal mantra of most of the folks that I've seen serving in Washington County. I think of long-serving families in here, like the Gardners, who unselfishly have, for generations, made this the place that it is today. I thank them for their service. I thank all of you for your service, and attempting to make this better than we found it. Critical part of that infrastructure that it's going to be for our children and grandchildren are going to be measured is going to be how we do our transportation system. You get one chance to kind of get it right now before the growth comes and things get somewhat literally cast in concrete. I think now is the time to do this. It's the opportunity to do this. And I think it's the right place, the right way, and I appreciate your service for trying to make things better. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Okay, I saw 3 hands. Is there anyone else that wanted to make a comment that? Okay, seeing none, why we would conclude this hearing, and thank you for your attendance.
The only thing I want to add is that the by-mail ballots are going out, I believe, tomorrow, and we're going to be having early voting here pretty quickly too. So I encourage people to vote.
Yes, get out to vote. Very important, this election.